I was sipping black coffee on the porch of the same farmhouse my grandfather built with his bare hands when the first bulldozer rolled onto my land. Thought it was a mistake, figured they were lost. But then another came, and another. By the end of the week, they'd flattened my cornfield and started pouring the foundation for a mansion. I'm Dalton Hayes. I'm a farmer, not a developer, not a landlord, and definitely not someone who gives permission to build 100 luxury mansions on his property. And yet, there they were. It all started with a woman named Heather Bramble, president of the Fair Hills Homeowners Association. She showed up in a pastel pantsuit, clipboard in hand, and a voice that could curdle milk. "You must be the caretaker," she said, stepping out of her BMW like she owned the place. "No," I said, standing in work boots and a flannel shirt stained with tractor grease. "I own this land." Her nose wrinkled like I'd said something uncivilized. "Well, according to our records, this parcel is part of Fair Hills now. We've begun Phase 4 of our luxury community expansion. Construction's already under contract." I just stared. "Lady, this is a farm. It's been in my family for 3 generations. You're trespassing," she laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, sweetie, the county approved the rezoning. Everything's in motion." "You should have read the notices." I hadn't gotten a single notice, no letters, no calls, nothing. The next day, I drove straight to the county clerk's office. That's when I found it fraudulent paperwork with my forged signature. A fake sale agreement. A rezoning petition with names that didn't exist. Every document tied back to Fair Hills HOA and their president, Heather Bramble. I confronted her while she was touring the model mansion they'd already finished on what used to be my soybean patch. "You forged documents and stole my land." Heather barely glanced at me. "Dalton, darling, you really should have hired a lawyer before now. Maybe then you'd understand how these things work." Oh, I understood. I just didn't think someone would be arrogant enough to try this on me. They'd built 10 mansions by the end of the month. Had plans for 90 more. Sold half of them to out-of-state tech executives who thought they were buying into an exclusive gated community. I watched them sip lattes on porches that weren't supposed to exist. I hired a lawyer named Reggie Small Office, Big Brain. We dug through every document, every signature, every zoning board appeal. It was all fake, all of it. I filed a suit so hard it rattled their little cookie-cutter kingdom. Title fraud, land theft, illegal construction, zoning violations, and racketeering. I named Heather Bramble and every board member of the HOA. The best part? I didn't just sue them for damages. I sued for the deeds. Every single one. 3 weeks after filing the suit, I walked out of the county courthouse with a stack of subpoenas under one arm and a restraining order under the other. The restraining order wasn't for me, it was for Heather Bramble. Turns out, she'd sent one of her board members to try and negotiate with me at 2 in the morning by banging on my front door and threatening to make things unpleasant if I didn't drop the lawsuit. The deputy who took my statement found the whole thing so ridiculous he stayed parked at the end of my driveway that night just to mess with them. Reggie and I knew we'd stirred the hornet's nest, but we weren't just poking it, we'd set it on fire. We didn't start with Heather. We started with the county zoning commissioner, a guy named Lewis Grant. He'd signed off on every permit, every land use change, every suspicious approval stamp that let Fair Hills bulldoze my fields. When Reggie subpoenaed his email records, we hit gold. Dozens of messages from Heather and her vice president, Todd Kinley, promising him preferential access to a lakeside home once construction was complete. One message even offered to cover campaign contributions if he fast-tracked the rezoning paperwork. Bribery, plain and simple. We handed it over to the state attorney's office. The investigation widened fast. Within days, the Department of Justice sent investigators to review municipal records. I watched from my porch as 2 black sedans rolled up to the HOA's temporary office, tucked into the first mansion they'd built. Agents in windbreakers carried out boxes of documents while Heather stood on the lawn pretending to look confused. She tried to talk to the press that afternoon, but every question made her jaw tighten just a bit more. Meanwhile, Reggie filed a motion to freeze all HOA assets, bank accounts, construction contracts, sale agreements. We argued that everything they built sat on stolen land based on false pretenses and criminal activity. The judge granted it. That meant no more closings, no more construction work, no more HOA dues collected from the people already living in those houses. The residents weren't happy. I didn't blame them. They'd bought into a lie, thinking they were moving into some exclusive community. Instead, they got yellow caution tape around their driveways and a pending federal investigation. One of them, a retired Air Force colonel named Rick Holloway, showed up at my place with a bottle of bourbon and an apology. "I thought you were the troublemaker," he said, setting the bottle on my table. "Turns out, you're the only damn reason we might keep our homes." I didn't drink with just anyone, but I made an exception for Rick. He'd already started organizing the other residents, digging into HOA bylaws and demanding an emergency meeting to remove Heather and her board. They'd tried to block it, of course, claiming the rules didn't allow for sudden leadership changes. But Rick brought in a lawyer of his own, a former JAG officer with a degree in contract law, and together they found the loophole. If 1/3 of the residents petitioned for a vote, the board was required to hold one within 10 days. They got half the neighborhood to sign in under 48 hours. When the meeting finally happened, Heather tried to run it like nothing was wrong. Dressed in a silk blazer and pearls, she stood in front of a projector screen with a slideshow titled Future Growth and Vision. Rick didn't even let her start. "This isn't a vision meeting," he said, stepping in front of the projector so her screen turned into a silhouette of his back. "This is a vote." Heather's voice cracked. "You don't have the authority to hijack this meeting. We have 47 signatures," Rick said, holding up a clipboard. "You don't get to duck the charter now." The vote wasn't close. 70% of the homeowners voted to dissolve the board entirely. Heather and the rest were removed on the spot. She left the meeting in a fury, heels clacking across the pavement like gunshots, but that wasn't the end of it. Not even close. The DOJ investigation uncovered something worse than zoning fraud. They traced HOA funds, millions of dollars being funneled through shell companies owned by Heather's cousin in Nevada. Money that was supposed to go toward community maintenance and infrastructure had instead bought luxury cars, vacations, and even a yacht named Covenant Queen. The yacht detail made the local news. It also got the IRS involved. By then, Reggie had filed a motion to expedite the civil case. We argued that the longer the homes sat in limbo, the more families suffered. The judge agreed and fast-tracked us to a hearing. I walked into court in a clean button-down and jeans. Heather showed up in an ankle monitor. It took 3 days for our case to be heard in full. Reggie presented forged signatures, illegal rezoning documents, the bribery emails, and financial records showing embezzlement and fraud. We didn't just prove that the HOA built on my land without permission, we proved they'd built their entire empire on lies. Their defense barely held together. Their lawyer, a sharp-looking guy with too much gel in his hair, tried to argue that I'd failed to respond to notices and missed the appeal window. But the clerk's testimony destroyed that argument. He confirmed under oath that none of those notices were ever sent to me. They'd been mailed to a fake address set up by the HOA. The judge leaned forward, adjusted his glasses, and said, "I'm not just ruling in favor of Mr. Hayes. I'm referring this entire matter to the State Bar, the Attorney General, and the federal authorities for further prosecution." And then, the part I'd been waiting for. "As for the properties in question," the judge said, glancing at the thick case file, "given the fraudulent nature of every acquisition, I hereby transfer deed ownership of all 100 constructed homes to the original landowner, Dalton Hayes." It was silent for a moment. Then Heather stood up and shouted, "You can't do that. That's theft." The judge didn't even look up. "You've got 30 days to vacate your residence, Miss Bramble. After that, Mr. Hayes is legally entitled to reclaim the property. I walked out of that courtroom owning 100 homes I never asked for, but had every right to back at the farm. I stood at the edge of the development mansions lined up like dominoes, quiet and still. Some of the residents had already moved out. Others waited to see what I'd do. I didn't kick out a single person. I met with each homeowner one by one. Anyone who'd bought their home in good faith. I offered them legal ownership through new, clean contracts, no HOA, no hidden fees, no nonsense. I priced them fairly, based on what they'd already paid, and put every dollar toward restoring the farmland that hadn't been covered in concrete. As for the homes still empty, those went to auction. Every dime went into a community trust. Rick helped me set up a new neighborhood council, voluntary, not mandatory, and every resident got a vote. Heather's mansion. I bulldozed it myself, didn't even hire a crew. Just took the old John Deere and pushed the whole thing down, one marble countertop at a time. Rick watched from a lawn chair. "You're gonna be a legend around here." I didn't care about that. I just wanted my land back. But if a legend's what it takes to keep people like Heather from pulling this kind of stunt again, I'll take it. I didn't expect to get a visit from the FBI, but 4 weeks after the ruling, 2 agents showed up on my porch with federal badges and a list of questions. They weren't there about the land, they were digging into something bigger. Wire fraud, mail tampering, and a suspicious escrow account the HOA had used to process homeowner payments. Apparently, the account linked back to an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. I invited them in and poured coffee. Agent Morales asked if I'd ever seen a woman named Teresa Langford. I hadn't. She was listed as the HOA's compliance officer, but no one had ever met her in person. Her signature, though, was on every quarterly HOA financial report for the past 2 years. Agent Morales handed me a photocopy of one of those reports. "We think she's a shell identity, fake, created to funnel money." I studied the signature extravagant loops and a flourish under the G. "You're saying the HOA invented an employee so they could embezzle funds," he nodded. "And we think Heather Bramble used that identity to open at least 3 bank accounts. We have a forensic accounting team tracing the money." Agent Lawrence, the other one, asked if I'd seen any unreported cash transactions during the construction. I hadn't touched the project until after the court ruling, but I did remember a few things from the site logs. I gave them access to everything. 3 days later, the story broke on national news. Luxury community scandal tied to financial fraud, fake employees, and international money laundering. The headline read, "Turns out, Heather hadn't worked alone." Todd Kinley, the HOA vice president, had been running a side hustle. He'd sold contracts for premium lot placements to multiple buyers for the same lot, collected deposits, and disappeared the funds. When the buyers showed up months later to find someone else living in their dream home, they were told to take it up with the board. Most gave up. One hired a private investigator. That's how the FBI got involved in the first place. Meanwhile, I was trying to manage a neighborhood that had no intention of becoming a neighborhood. I held town meetings in the old equipment barn, which still smelled like diesel and hay. Rick Holloway helped moderate, and people showed up with folding chairs and questions. At one meeting, a software developer named Priya asked, "Why not turn this into a cooperative?" No HOA, just a shared council with rotating leadership. Someone else, a schoolteacher named Miguel, raised the idea of using some of the community trust funds to build an actual park, something the HOA had promised but never delivered. I told them, "If you're staying here, you get a voice. I'm not running anything, I just own the land." They elected a steering committee that night, 7 members, all voluntary, no salaries. Priya and Miguel both joined. They started drafting a charter that emphasized transparency, limited term roles, and zero authority over personal property. It felt like healing. Slow, uncomfortable, but honest. Then a letter arrived from a law firm in Chicago claiming to represent disenfranchised investors who had purchased stakes in the HOA's development plan. The letter demanded restitution or ownership of at least 20 properties. They included a list of lots, some of them already occupied by families. Reggie reviewed the documents and nearly choked on his sandwich. These guys bought shares in a Ponzi scheme, and now they want the real estate equivalent of a refund. I let him handle the legal response, but told him, if they try to enforce anything on the ground, I want them charged with trespassing. That same week, an unmarked van started circling the development at odd hours. At first, we thought it might be reporters, but one night, Rick followed it in his truck and watched two men take photos of the homes, jotting down notes and measuring distances. He called the sheriff. They turned out to be property assessors hired by the investors. One of them had a felony conviction for fraud. The sheriff had them detained for questioning, and they admitted they were sent to determine which homes could be quietly reclaimed and resold. The sheriff called me the next morning. "You've got vultures circling, Dalton. You want me to post a car out there?" "No," I said, "but I want a no trespassing sign on every lot, and anyone who sets foot on these properties without permission, I want prosecuted." We printed hundreds of signs and handed them out at the next town meeting. The residents put them up themselves: windows, porches, fences, even mailboxes. 1 week later, a man in a suit knocked on the door of the Nguyen family who lived in Lot 42. He claimed to be a representative of the rightful owners and offered them cash to vacate within 72 hours. Mr. Nguyen called Rick, who called me. I called the sheriff. The man was arrested for attempted coercion and trespassing. His phone contained texts from one of the Chicago investors instructing him to start soft, escalate if needed. That evidence triggered a federal injunction against all investor attempts to recover property. A judge barred them from further interference pending criminal investigation. Meanwhile, the FBI had uncovered something new. Over half of the construction workers used by the HOA had been paid under the table, with no insurance, no contracts, and no safety oversight. Several had been injured on site and forced to sign non-disclosure agreements in exchange for hush money. One of them, a welder named Jorge, came forward after hearing about the lawsuit. He testified that he'd been told to work double shifts without breaks and was threatened with deportation if he complained. The Department of Labor launched a probe. Multiple contractors were fined. 2 were indicted. Jorge received a settlement and was given legal aid to pursue permanent residency. Within 6 months, Heather Bramble was indicted on 16 federal charges, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Todd Kinley fled the state, but was picked up in Arizona trying to cross into Mexico with 10 burner phones and a suitcase full of cash. The neighborhood, meanwhile, transformed. The steering committee used the auction proceeds to pave roads, install solar-powered streetlights, and build a community center in the shell of what was once Heather's model mansion. They planted a garden where her front lawn used to be vegetables, flowers, herbs. At the dedication ceremony, Priya stood next to a hand-painted sign that read "Fairfield Commons, a community by choice," and said, "We're not a development anymore. We're a neighborhood." I stayed out of the spotlight. I still had fences to repair and fields to restore. But I kept a chair by the community garden, and sometimes I'd sit there in the evenings and listen. Kids playing, dogs barking, laughter drifting between houses, not forced, not regulated, free, and that, I figured, was worth every bulldozed inch. The first heavy rain of the season hit, just as the last of the investor lawsuits were dismissed. I watched from the front porch as water pooled in the ditches and slid off the new community center's roof in clean sheets. For the first time in months, there wasn't a single legal notice on my doorstep, no news vans crawling past the fence line, and no unfamiliar cars idling with tinted windows and clipboards. But the quiet didn't last. It started with a letter from the Department of Environmental Quality. "Routine inspection notice," it said. But buried halfway down the page was a reference to a permit issued 3 years earlier, long before the HOA had ever broken ground. The permit authorized underground water line rerouting for commercial development across my property. The problem was, I never signed off on any utilities being rerouted, and nobody, not even during the lawsuits, had mentioned anything about water lines. I handed the letter to Reggie, and he raised an eyebrow as he read it. "How far under your land are we talking?" I called in a private survey team. Took them 4 days to map it all. When they showed me the results, I had to sit down. 2 miles of illegal piping ran beneath my remaining farmland, diverting runoff and well water into a holding reservoir on the far edge of the old soybean field. The lines didn't just cut through my property, they drained it. My crop yield hadn't just dropped because of the construction. They'd siphoned the water directly out from under me. The reservoir itself wasn't on any public record. It had been hidden behind a row of trees and screened off with artificial hedges. The only access point was through a locked gate behind what used to be the HOA's maintenance shed. Reggie went dead quiet when he saw it. "They built an unregistered reservoir on private land, rerouted your water supply without consent, and never disclosed it during litigation." "It gets worse," I said, pointing to the fencing. "That gate's got a municipal lock on it." "That means someone in the city gave them access." Reggie made 2 calls, one to the Department of Water Resources, the other to a contact he had in the state ag's office. By the next morning, we had a state environmental investigator on site. Her name was Carolyn NG, and she didn't waste time. She took water samples, photographed every inch of the reservoir, and measured the soil saturation around the pipelines. By afternoon, she was on the phone with her supervisor. "There's arsenic in the outflow," she said, hanging up. "Not natural levels. Someone dumped industrial runoff into this system." "What kind of runoff?" I asked. "Solvent grade, paint remover, degreaser, possibly even engine lubricant. This reservoir isn't just illegal, it's toxic." Within 48 hours, the EPA had boots on the ground. Hazmat suits, sealed canisters, the whole 9 yards. They shut down the entire area and ordered an immediate remediation plan. The community center, the garden, even Rick's house, everything within 200 feet of the reservoir had to be temporarily evacuated. The residents were furious. Not at me, at the people who'd buried poison under their homes. The EPA traced the pollution to a contractor the HOA had hired during the early stages of construction, a company called Eastline Management. They were supposed to install temporary holding tanks for construction waste, but instead they dug a pit, lined it with concrete, and dumped everything underground. It saved them thousands, and the HOA had known. They found emails, this time between Todd Kinley and the contractor's project lead, discussing how discrete containment would accelerate development timelines and allow for budget reallocation. The phrase budget reallocation turned out to be code for bribes. The federal prosecutor didn't even blink. New charges were filed against the surviving members of the HOA board: environmental contamination, unlawful misappropriation of municipal resources, conspiracy to commit fraud, and reckless endangerment. But the real twist came when the state health department got involved. They ran a toxicology report on the water samples and found contamination levels high enough to cause long-term health effects. Residents who'd used tap water for months, including infants and elderly, had been exposed. Priya, who'd given birth just 3 months earlier, was one of them. The state declared the entire development a disaster zone. Emergency funding was allocated, medical screenings were mandated, and Reggie filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of every resident. This time, I wasn't the lead plaintiff. I was just a witness, though a key one. I testified to the hidden reservoir, the forged permits, and the tactics used to conceal the contamination. I showed them the original survey maps, the falsified documents, and the pipeline paths that cut across the land like veins of theft. The judge ordered immediate seizure of all assets connected to Eastline Management. The company declared bankruptcy within a week, and its CEO was arrested trying to board a private jet in Baton Rouge. But the real hammer came down on the city official who'd approved the underground rerouting. His name was Vincent Dorr, Deputy Director of Public Works. He'd signed off on every unregistered permit and accepted payments through a nonprofit shell designed to look like a community improvement fund. The FBI raided his home and found over $300,000 in cash hidden in a crawl space. He was indicted within days and agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony confirmed what we'd suspected. The HOA's board had built their operation on a network of backdoor deals, bribes, and silent partners. Heather may have been the face, but the infrastructure ran deeper. The state used the new evidence to reform municipal oversight policies and launch an audit of every HOA in the county. 3 others were dissolved. 7 board members across different developments were removed, and 2 more were indicted for unrelated violations. The residents of my land, now calling themselves Fairfield Commons, held another town meeting. This time, it wasn't in anger or fear. It was about the future. They voted to establish an independent water system, funded by the class action settlement. They chose to convert the contaminated reservoir into a protected wetland once cleaned. And they passed a resolution banning any future HOA or similar governing body from establishing authority over the land without unanimous consent. Rick stepped down from the steering committee, citing the need for fresh leadership. Priya was unanimously elected to take his place. Miguel, the teacher, proposed a neighborhood mentorship program for students interested in environmental science. Jorge, the welder, was hired to help install the new solar-powered filtration system. I didn't speak at the meeting. But when it ended, Priya handed me a wooden plaque carved by Miguel's students. It had a single sentence etched across the top: "This land stands because someone stood for it." I hung it on the barn wall, right above the old radio that still picked up weather reports and classic country. That night, I walked through the rows of newly planted trees along the edge of the field. No sirens, no flashlights, just wind in the branches and the low hum of crickets. The land was mine again, but more than that, it was finally right. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without wondering what would be taken next.